Welcome to the I Am Interchange podcast, where artists, activists, and entrepreneurs with different ideas and perspectives come together and address multiple topics and provoke thoughtful dialogue. This is our edited dialogue and debate for Is Water a Human Right? A special thank you to Mountain Time Arts, who commissioned this event and topic. There's a saying that has cropped up time and time again: whiskey's for drinking and water is for fighting. Access to clean water is not just a problem in the developing world, but a nuanced and delicate problem that shows up in communities of all kinds across the globe in different and often hard to recognize forms. It could be a lack of infrastructure, a lack of access, a consequence of a drought, or sometimes even the result of expanding subdivisions and their impact on the water rights of agricultural landowners. No one denies that water is a necessity for life, human and non-human alike. But the question of water rights is not quite so straightforward. In the middle of a fierce and dry fire season, and in the wake of catastrophic hurricanes, I Am Interchange assembled a panel to delve into the questions surrounding how water and the way we view it affects our daily lives, our communities, and our relationship to the environment, and whether or not water is a basic human right. Before we get down to business, we sent our writer Dylan out to talk to people as they arrive to get to know what does water mean to them and what questions they are bringing with them to the discussion.
So water rights is just about to start up, so what are you guys hoping to get out of the discussion tonight?
Honestly, I feel like I don't know a ton about the details of this subject, and so honestly just a better understanding of all that goes into it and the controversy and different perspectives on the issue.
Yeah, I guess just a lot of different points of view on the matter, based on the laws regarding water consumption, and as well as different perspectives. Some people use a lot more water than other people, and there's a lot of contaminated water, so things like that.
What are you hoping to get out of the discussion tonight?
Well, I think that opening up dialogue between people who are immersed in this county and its rate of growth, whether or not we agree with the rate of growth and how a lot of our natural resources are being handled here. I think it's a great concern for anyone who's planning on staying here a while, raising kids or whatever.
Yeah, we're here for the art show at the beginning, and then we're going to check out the conversation. I don't really know anything about the subject at hand, vaguely water related.
I find it sad that we're in a state that we have to ask, is water a basic human right? It's pretty obvious it is. Our bodies are 70-ish% water, so it's pretty necessary. You look around at the smoke today and you look at the things that we can't contain in the environment and how they affect our health, and it's a big deal that we have access to clean air, clean water, and all that. So.
Well, I'm interested to hear how people define the concept of right, especially with respect to water. And I actually heard one of the pre-interviews that Tate did with E.J. Engler, and I was intrigued with the concept of, water rights, quote unquote, maybe being analogous to land rights, and the whole idea that maybe we don't necessarily have rights to land, or we happen to have stewardship or something like that. So I'm interested in that discussion.
With everyone inside our panel assembled, it was time to dive in and hear what brought all our panelists together.
My name is E.J. Engler. I'm an architect, I'm a builder, I'm a student, I'm a perpetual student, sculptor, fabricator, poet. I'm originally from Omaha, Nebraska. My dad's side of the family is from western Nebraska in the Sandhills. My mom's side of the family is from central Iowa. And so they straddle the 100th meridian. 100th meridian, I reference to John Wesley Powell, is that my dad's family may do on about 14 inches of rain per year. My mom's side of the family in central Iowa, 30 plus inches of rain. Some of the most beautiful blackest topsoil you can imagine in central Iowa. Western Nebraska, sand hills, about 6 inches of barely there on 14 inches of moisture. So I've been in Gallatin Gateway for 22 years. I design, build, make things. I don't really see any difference between any parts of the process. Part of why I'm here is my architectural thesis at the Cooper Union in New York City is focused on Thomas Jefferson, the Public Land Act, the Homestead Act, and the whole abstraction of property and property rights in the United States. And I'm focused on that, and that's my continuing thesis that I'm continuing to work on, and I'm incredibly happy to be here and part of this discussion because I've been studying and doing a lot of background work, and I'm super excited about what the Mountain Arts people just did. That blew my mind last Friday, so that's my start.
My name is Matt Kelley. I'm, health officer in Gallatin County. I'm director of your local health department. I spent the first 30 years of my life, like a lot of people, not thinking a lot about water. And then I joined the Peace Corps and ended up in the Saharan Sahel, living in Mali, West Africa. And our host family, we would go to their house every night and we would have dinner. And about once a month, maybe more frequently than that, somebody from our village or one of the surrounding villages, which were all subsistence farming villages, would come in and they'd be carrying a child. And the child would be in pretty bad shape. And often they were stricken with some sort of water-related illness, whether that was a diarrheal illness or malaria, which is mosquito-borne, but as you know, as most of you know, is really related to water and standing water. And we would come back the next day and we would ask the reason they would come to that house was the village doctor lived there. And we would go home and we'd come back the next day, and often that child would not have made it. Often that child was coming in and they wouldn't make it. And that was a formative experience for me. I was a water and sanitation volunteer. Came back to the United States and I thought, well, this is different. We live in a different place. And went to public health school, ended up in Gallatin County, Montana. And one of the first things that happened to me as health officer was an outbreak of Campylobacter related to a little campground near Hebgen Lake that filled up the hospital in Ennis with sick people. And I realized that my job now deals a great deal with trying to protect groundwater supplies and dealing with communicable diseases that are spread through water. So that's where I come from. That's how I think about water most of the time. And that's who I am.
Hi, my name is Kareen Erbe. I run a small business in town called Broken Ground, and I teach people how to grow their own food. So obviously water figures really high in that. Not only teach people how to garden, but I teach them about a concept called permaculture. And Tate mentioned that I'm a permaculturalist, which means, and permaculture, for those that don't know, stands for permanent agriculture or permanent culture. And it's a design approach for sustainable living and land use rooted in the observation of natural systems. So it's used to design not only your yards or your properties, but whole communities and neighborhoods by capturing water, by growing your own food, by using passive solar design. So it's all in the smart design where we can conserve resources and have more energy efficient resource conserving properties. In terms of the world water condition today, I think it's something like, just to kind of dovetail off of what Matt said, 1.3 billion people lack access to clean water. I think here in Bozeman, we don't feel it as acutely, but definitely in developing countries, countries that I've been in, where I have communicated, where I've gotten waterborne diseases myself and had direct experience with people who have died from waterborne disease, or have had family members die from waterborne diseases. We are insulated here, and yet still it's going to be a huge issue, and we're going to see it as Bozeman grows.
I guess you could call me a community activist because I keep showing up at public meetings for 30 years. My interest is in resource policy and land use policy. I have a degree in forestry from University of Montana, and I came up here from St. Louis when I was 18 and went to forestry school. Probably the role I've come to inhabit is as a cross-pollinator of information across diverse groups, and also as a translator between urban and rural. I'm on the board of the Greater Gallatin Watershed Council and also on the Association of Gallatin Agricultural Irrigators. From 1976, when we moved here, we built a farm from scratch in the Gallatin Valley and raised Dexter cattle for grass-fed beef. That whole operation is based on Gallatin River water. So I'm constantly involved with that and water rights. From 1980 to 2004, I was a rural route mail carrier on the West Bridgers and watched the changes that occurred on the landscape as well as in the water regime. And that's an odd place to be because you're kind of like a silent partner in community while you're doing this. The other thing I've done is being a columnist for the Bozeman Chronicle as a country lifestyle columnist. So that's what made them want me on the Aggie board, because I could explain things.
I'm Bentley Spang, and right now I have a lot of water coming out of me. It's a little warm up here. It's part of my relationship with water right now. I'm from the Northern Cheyenne Nation, or as we call ourselves, Tsitstas Suta people. We have a reservation in the southeastern corner of Montana. And we've been dealing with climate change and water issues, et cetera, for thousands of years. So we have a pretty long track record of finding ways and solutions and, possible connections to solutions to these problems. So, but I grew up on a ranch, on and off a ranch on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. Also, we moved around the northwest coast area. I lived in Alaska for a couple years when I was a kid. So I got to see things off the reservation and on the reservation, how things work and how we're perceived as Native people, and got to understand the larger issues around water and land and identity. Those are things that I really explore in my work. I'm a visual artist working in any medium I can get my hands on, basically. A lot of video and installation, sculpture, performance, things like that. I just did a piece with Mountain Time Arts, wonderful organization, woohoo, and did a great piece about water called Waterways, 21 channel video channels and 6 digital still channels. Anyway, just to kind of help people understand my relationship to the water on my land and how we should all have a relationship to the water in the areas that we're in, and that can help us come up with solutions. Thank you.
My name's Carson Taylor. At this moment in time, I'm the mayor of Bozeman, Montana, and I've been on the city commission for 7.5 years. I guess the starting point of my relationship to water is that my son-in-law is the executive director of the Mona Lake Committee, which sued and prevented the city of Los Angeles from taking water from the Eastern Sierra, which caused them to do a lot of innovation in water conservation, which has made a huge difference in terms of what their needs are. When I got to being the mayor, the first thing that I was told was we were going to build a big dam up at Mystic Lake, and it was going to cost $40 million, and it was going to put us in enough water to keep us fine for a long time, and it made absolutely no sense to me. I got myself appointed to the Integrated Water Resources Planning Committee. Some of the people from that committee are here. And we looked at what do we need for a 50-year water plan for the city of Bozeman. While working that through, we rejected a few ideas, one of which was the dam, another of which was piping the water back from Canyon Ferry Reservoir, which to me was like, are you kidding me? Why would you ever do that? And for me, in the city and the county, because I really like to think of myself as a resident of this one big community, water is integrally related with agriculture. And we have to figure out a way to not pave over all the great ag land that exists in this county. And the city has a role in that, as do other people, some of whom are on this panel.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Steve White. I'm one of your Gallatin County Commissioners. There's 3 of us. I've been in office since 2007. My family arrived in the Gallatin Valley. My great-grandfather, Stephen White, came through the Bear Canyon cut over there in a covered wagon, homesteaded on the Madison River, and now then moved over in west of town up on what is now Gooch Hill Road. I reside on a family ranch that we've had in our family since 1899. I grew up in Bozeman, graduated from MSU in geology, moved to Helena, became a geohydrologist for Department of Natural Resources Conservation within the Water Resources Division, and specifically water rights. My job as a geohydrologist was, while taking postgraduate courses at Montana Tech and Butte, my job was to analytically determine the adverse effect, if any, from pumping a well greater than 150 gallons a minute on neighboring wells. Oftentimes I was working with wells that were taking about 1,000 to 1,500 gallons a minute of water out of the ground in 30-inch well casings. It was my job to determine what effect it would have on neighboring wells, and I developed computer models to do such since that was my minor in college. And then I became a county commissioner, and specifically I represent the Gallatin County Commission of the Big Sky Sustainable Water Solutions Forum, also on the Gallatin Local Water Quality District. I represent the Montana Association of Counties on the Montana Groundwater Assessment Steering Committee. And finally, our family has water rights in the 1890s coming out of the West Gallatin and what was called the Klein-Schmidt Canal.
Brian Popiel. I'm former president of the Southwest Montana Building Industry Association. The thing that jumped out to me when Tate posed the question about your relationship with water and what does it mean to you, it became really clear in a hurry that when you stop and think about it is how little we think about it. And especially, in the building industry, having built houses in the valley here for the last 15 or 20 years, you walk into a building of any sort, you turn on a sink and you expect it to run. You flush a toilet and you expect it to evacuate your waste somewhere. And so I think it's really fascinating the way we don't think about it and how you almost need a forum, you need somebody to pose the question to you to think how important it is and how central it is to everything you do. And so when we talk about development, we talk about working with the city, working with the county, as we look for places to house people, and as we construct a new and dynamic built environment in this valley. One of the things that's going to constrain us and that's going to direct us in how we do that is our ability to deliver water to those, the fixtures in your house that supply water to you. And so really that's the central thing that I'm thinking about is how do we make sure we've got enough water to do the things that we want to do, to live the way that we want to live, and how does our relationship with that change?
At a very basic level, the whole concept of water rights can seem strange and utterly obvious. We all need water to live, and if you're a farmer, your entire livelihood depends on having a way to irrigate your crops and provide for your livestock. If your farmland is next to a river or a stream, then it seems even more obvious that you should be able to use that water to keep yourself in business. But what happens if too many people upstream from you draw too much? Even if you can physically access it, you may not have the legal right to use that water, depending on where you live and what laws apply to you. We brought in Carrie Strassheim for the Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation to break it down.
So, what is a water right? A water right is the right to use water, which is owned by the state of Montana. A water right is a type of property right. While water rights are generally considered an appurtenance or attachment to land, they can be bought and sold separately from the land. So in Montana, we are first in time is first in right, or under the prior appropriation doctrine. And that's versus what's also known as the Eastern Doctrine, or if you can access it, you can use it. So big difference depending on which side of the country you're on. Water rights in the Gallatin Valley go back to 1860. So those were the senior water rights, or the oldest water rights. On the West Gallatin, water rights 1880 or later are pretty junior. And then after 1890, you're looking at what are kind of called high or floodwater rights. So those are some pretty old dates. So for example, when flows are starting to get low on a river or stream, that 1860 user has the first dibs on that water. And then you go down by priority date. So sometimes, as you get down, there isn't enough water for everybody. But we are in the arid West, and that's how the system was developed. So water rights do need to be maintained. There is some truth. You've probably all heard, use it or lose it. So conveyances, such as ditches, canals, and pipelines, need to be maintained. And then the water has to be used beneficially, pretty regularly, and it's a good idea to keep records. Due process is required for a water right to be deemed abandoned. So due process is through a court system. There's a guideline in place that if water's not used for 10 years or so, then that's when it starts to become a concern. But that's not a hard, fast rule. It's up to the courts on a case-by-case basis. I sometimes think that this is a little bit of an urban legend. I have heard use it or lose it kind of used in response to, oh, someone's irrigating in the rain. It's use it or lose it. Well, it's not quite that instantaneous. But speaking of rain, the Montana Constitution, which went into effect in 1973, was very thorough in clarifying that Montana owns all of the groundwater, surface water, floodwater, and meteoric water. Not all states were that thorough, leading to some water management challenges in those states, especially with respect to groundwater. Water rights differ from state to state, but they are a state-level jurisdiction. The federal government gave the state this jurisdiction back in the day. I won't go into boring history details. And the process for federal and tribal entity water rights is a little different, often referred to as the compact process. And that's more of a negotiation style, although those entities were able to file water rights as well, just like anyone else. So water rights are a valuable asset, and the bottom line is that every beneficial use generally needs a water right, a right to use that water.
Montana, like most states west of the Mississippi, uses prior appropriation laws. In our case, the rule is first in time, first in right. So whoever has the earliest claim to a water source has the greater legal right. And remember, those rights can be sold separately from the actual land. Compare that to the less arid eastern states that use riparian rights, or eastern model. With the threat of drought being much greater in the arid west, there was a greater need to regulate water use. But climate is not the only factor that shapes how we treat water. Just as the British common law tradition shaped the laws in the early states, how a culture values water can mean everything when it comes to the question of who has a right to use it and in what ways. We put the question to our panel, and Bentley Spang had this to say.
For my people, and I don't speak for my people, I speak for my own experience. But growing up on and off the reservation, water is sort of, I've always seen it and been taught to see it as an entity, as a sort of a being almost. And so, the water sources on our reservation are venerated places, so where the springs come out and show themselves. You want that to continue to happen. You want to continue to have flows, that you can use and utilize. So we take action to honor those areas. A lot of times when you drive through my reservation, you'll see offerings around springs because that's where life comes from. That's literally where life comes from, and so it has a sort of a venerated place in my community. So,
how about agriculture, Susan? How does agriculture value water?
Water's life. Water's life, and part of that is, I would say that there's three elements: air, and water, and solar energy. And one way of looking at that is perhaps they should be communally owned rather than individually owned, because these are three elements that flow through. It's not just, it doesn't stop somewhere, it flows through.
We're experiencing an event in Houston where 14 trillion gallons of water dropped on a fourth largest city in the U.S. in a matter of days. And so water is life here because we live in a relatively arid climate. Water is also really destructive in a lot of places. People have a really, really complicated relationship with water. I think back through, I had a background in history, and so I think back to the Egyptians, again, living in a desert, and then also having to deal with annual floods. And that being built into, part and parcel of what your life, what your culture is like in that place. And so there's a really, really wide range. I think I guess it's a difficult question to unpack.
Tate, can I?
Yeah, go ahead, EJ.
As I say at the beginning, my architectural thesis is on Thomas Jefferson, the Public Land Act, and the Homestead Act, and essentially that moment when the Judeo-Christian lineage comes to this country and claims a right to a place, claims a right to property, claims a right to water, and at that point it's a separation. And it's always something that's bothered me personally, but it's as an observation, is that it's in the classic tradition, it's a separation of I'm apart from the water, I'm apart from the land. I own this piece of land, I own this water, I have the rights to the water, I own that water, which is a very different relationship than what you articulate, which is I'm a part of this landscape, or I'm part of a sacred realm or a sacred continuum. And so in the classic, the state has rights, I have rights, people have rights to irrigate, etc. That's always a separation where you're apart from the water, or you're apart from
It almost
the
seems
land.
perverse to talk about water rights in the middle of one of the worst hurricane seasons in recent memory, especially with the devastating flooding still fresh in the news. But they underpin a complex network of interactions and issues that impact all of us. We shape our laws, and our laws affect how we shape the land and our communities. But when it comes to water, what about prioritizing certain uses over others? When it comes down to why a state like Montana uses the first in time, first in right model, Susan Duncan put it bluntly.
That's the only objective standard that we have. It may not be the only one or the best one, but that's the one that we have. It's objective, it's a matter of public record, and it's legal. How do you determine what is the highest and best use, and how do you determine who gets how much, and try to enforce that if you don't have any objective standard?
Well, in Montana, it's pretty well set out. As Carrie said, with the Water Use Act of 1973, you've got Title IX of the Montana Constitution that lays out the foundation for water rights, and it gave directive to the Montana legislature to develop statutes to further that. And so in Title 8 or 85 and Chapter 2, I guess it is, it gets into the details of first and right, first time, and that that's how we do it in Montana. But I think it's important that we have a way to manage it, and I have no issue with as long as the people that are using the water put it to a beneficial use, which is demanded. And that's why we have a successful cropland in this county as across the state.
Well, I also think that it's important to, the gal from the DNRC touched on it about the compact process for tribes. And, historically, because we signed treaties with the federal government that, on a federal level, that kind of first in time, first in right thing lies with tribes a lot of times. So we just had a negotiated compact by the Salish Kootenai tribe that was ratified by the Montana legislature and went through quite a battle. A lot of groups were against it, and that's something to look at. But those are all a part of that mix of the rights to the water in this area. And so it gives us a historical, we need to look at things historically as well to understand the water rights issue.
It's good for now. What happens if global warming results in the Gallatin Valley, the state of Montana, getting thrown into such an incredible drought that the beneficial uses that are accorded to people according to first and right no longer really do the job for the two main uses, as I see it: drinking water for human beings and ag water? How do we rationalize that at that moment in time, and should we be planning for that at this point?
One of the things that in addressing that issue, one of the ways that water rights for tribes developed in this part of the country was through a court case called the Winters Doctrine, which was the Fort Belknap Reservation, and it was just exactly what we were talking about. There was a drought situation. Farmers were diverting from the Milk River, and so was the tribe, the federal government, through the federal government. And so a drought happened, and there wasn't enough water for everybody. And so a lawsuit by the federal government was put in place, and it was determined that, that's where the sort of historical piece came in to determine who had rights to that water, first rights. And so, it goes to the courts, but also at the same time, the Salish Kootenai tribe, when they negotiated their compact, they made sure they had the right to a lot of water, but they made sure that all the people in that area had the water they needed in that compact. So it's about being good neighbors with each other. It's about, being in this all together and recognizing that. So.
And Tate, I'd also add that regarding the good neighbors, that happens a lot in Gallatin County with the water commissioner that is in charge of, as the water goes down in the river, there's certain rights, the later rights are not going to receive the water that they would like to have on a wetter year. So if we do go into the drought situations, which I think the lowest rainfall we've had in Gallatin County was in 1935, and accordingly the surface water was low too, that when that happens, the senior rights take precedence over the junior rights, and it all works out. And in this county, the ranchers and farmers that depend upon those water rights are very quick to work together, and so that everybody can make it through a dry year.
So that everybody can make it through a dry year. Perhaps the success of a water rights system ultimately relies not on legislation or legal authority, but on our shared willingness to look after each other, to be proactive in ensuring the lives and livelihoods of our neighborhoods, our friends, and our communities in the face of shared hardships. And in that thought, are we not admitting that water must be a basic right, and not just a privilege granted to only those that the law favors? Of course. If it was that simple, we wouldn't have needed to have this discussion in the first place. Mayor Taylor brought up an interesting point. If the global climate trends keep changing, then we'll have to rethink the rights system. It begs another question, though. Are the Western United States already living in an artificial condition? Data from the U.S. Geological Survey measuring groundwater levels from the 1900s to 2008 show that many areas across the country have experienced drops in the groundwater levels of their major aquifers and subsystems. Some by as much as 150 to 400 cubic kilometers in parts of Louisiana, Arkansas, and the Mississippi. If some aquifers are losing their water, how can we tell and what can we do about it? Here's EJ Engler.
It's a large topic and it's a vast topic, but my questions would run along the lines of how far are we over allocated for each particular basin? How far are we beyond what each basin will produce, what each basin has in its yearly annual income? And that's my question for the scientists, and for the people who make policy is how do we determine how much water we can pull out of the groundwater, out of the aquifer? It's relatively straightforward when you look at first in time, first in rights. The surface ag is relatively straightforward. Here's your yearly income of how much snowmelt you have, how much rainfall you have to work with, and that shuts off and clicks off during the season. That one's relatively straightforward, and we can see that one. The one I have questions about is how much are we pulling out of the aquifer? And is anybody looking at that?
Tate, I could jump in on some of that. The big thing that we have to reflect on, I think, is back to the recharge of the aquifer. And with some of the things that we've seen with what has gone on with our aquifer, different basins are different. I was curious, I hadn't looked at it for about 10 years, as to what is going on with our valley. And the choke point for analyzing the amount of water that comes through our valley is at Logan at the stream gauge. It's been in existence since 1894, and it was easy to pick up the USGS data and chart it out on an Excel spreadsheet. And I just also, the meteorology station up at MSU has been in existence since 1894 as well, coincidentally. And it was interesting to chart out the precip and chart out the average CFS daily at Logan. And what was interesting is the two go together. And in fact, if you do a linear trend line, which Excel just does with the press of a button, it was interesting. The trend line for precip has gone up since 1894 through last year at probably about a 1 degree slope. And this is Gallatin Valley. It's different than other places.
This is the annual precipitation in the valley?
Annual precip, if it's just the numbers coming from MSU. And then for the CFS at the Logan station, it's the linear trend line there is is parallel, so it's gone up. Now, that's this valley. And we have to reflect on the reason we have a green valley is because of all of the ditches and canals. And once those stop being used, then you won't see the greenery. But back to the connection of what's in the river and where does it come from? It comes from precip. And it was interesting to me. It's just taking their data, USGS and MSU's.
Right.
Go ahead, DJ.
Well, I guess my question is that we're looking at the data at Logan, we're looking at the data at MSU, we're looking at the annual rainfall, we're watching everything very carefully on the surface. My question is, I have a 40-foot well in Gallatin Gateway. Who's looking at what's actually flowing underneath the ground, or who's paying attention to how many exempt wells are actually pulling water, how many acre feet are coming out of the exempt wells, and how does that trend out over the next 20, 30, and 40 years?
Well, and that is an absolutely great question. But the Smith Water lawsuit, which was in the Supreme Court a number of years ago, 10 years ago or something, actually gave official legal connection between groundwater and surface water. And I believe it to be true. You have different kinds of aquifers, but nevertheless, there's this interconnect. So what usually has happened, and I'm seeing it as a county commissioner, that people's the static water levels have gone down a little bit. Right. And those are in typically what we call unconfined aquifers. And when those water levels go down, sometimes you note that up gradient was a farm field that was flood irrigated. In this part of the valley, flood irrigation is prevalent. Once that flood irrigation ceases, then that massive amount of recharge is no longer. I'll tell you where the water tables have been going down is like if you look at Idaho and it's happening around Montana, we have such sophisticated pivots that are providing just the amount of water the plants need. There's no more slop over. Yep. And so what happens is the plants are consuming huge consumptive use. And so there is no more going down into the aquifer for that recharge. And so the question I ask, and maybe Walt Sales and others would know the answer, is what did this valley look like before we had 40 ditches and canals stretching across it? It might have looked like Helena, where it's pretty dry and pretty arid. But we have an incredible thing going on. And yes, they do leak. And the reason they leak, and when they leak, they produce green grass.
Right. How long does it take to recharge an aquifer?
It depends upon the coefficients of the aquifer. And it depends upon the kind of aquifer. You have a confined and you have an unconfined. A confined would be an aquifer that is trapped underneath a clay layer. Yep. So the recharge from that is going to probably start at the mountains, where the aquifer slides up against the mountains. If it's a shallow aquifer that is around Gallatin River and the braided stream environment, it's going to recharge pretty fast. So the aquifer is the battery. So as the melt is gone from the mountains and there's no more snow up in the mountains, people say, well, where's the water coming from to keep the Gallatin River going? And where it's coming from is now the flow gradients have switched, and now the aquifer is losing water to the rivers, and that's.
And you're saying there's enough rainfall per year that we're at a net gain on water?
I'm just telling you what I found with USGS data. It was somewhat surprising, but it's there. So.
Okay, Bentley and then EJ.
Okay, did you want to finish your?
No, I just want to. The curiosity I have on the question, to give a little bit more background, is I'm from Nebraska, Sand Hills, and through Nebraska, and we're watching the Ogallala Aquifer and the impacts of center pivot irrigation. And the tidbit of fact is, near where I grew up is Valley, Nebraska, which makes the center pivot. And so I've watched the entire evolution of the center pivot through my whole life and watched the efficiencies change. And that efficiency went from a dump that would actually recharge the aquifer to now it's 4.5 feet above and it barely misses and it saturates 2 to 3 inches, and our efficiencies have gotten so great so that there's nothing returning back to the aquifer. And so at a certain question, there's a superficial, it looks good in Logan, but I'm asking the larger question, what's happening in the aquifer? And it's really prevalent. You can see it clearly in the Central Valley. You can see it clearly in the Ogallala Aquifer. As that well level keeps dropping, how long did it take for that aquifer to build up? How long did it take for that aquifer to charge? And the one that I start to raise on that is, we're pulling out of our deep savings account. We're not working off of our yearly income. And that becomes my question for this valley is, are we working off of our yearly income, or are we starting to dip into and pull out of that deep savings account, because as we dip into that deep savings account to use that to pay for a trout fishery, alfalfa, new homes, hospitals, municipal uses, as we dip into that deep savings account, what happens 20 years from now, 30 years from now when that tab comes due?
Before we get ahead of ourselves, it's worth noting that when we use water, we're not destroying it. The vast majority goes back into the whole global system in one way or another. We can, at some level, think of it not as a problem of supply as much as a problem of distribution and quality. The problem becomes that when water leaves one area, it can take a very long time for it to return. With that in mind, can we justify using more water than we truly need? Steve White helps us put it in perspective.
The thing that's important with water, and you have surface water and groundwater, and they're connected. Groundwater, water tables will drop if the recharge isn't there, and it's the aquifer, the shallow aquifers that feed the streams when the snow melt is gone. But the thing that sometimes is lost in the discussion is what's called consumptive use. And consumptive use, when you pump, well, first of all, you can pump 35 gallons a minute legally out of a domestic well, but not many people pump more than 4 or 5 gallons a minute. But what do you do with that water? It comes into if you have a septic system, it comes into your house, you take a shower, you water, or you wash the clothes, you wash the dishes, and et cetera, et cetera. Of all of that water that you've taken out at 2-3 gallons a minute, pretty much the accepted amount is about a 2 to 3% consumptive use. So that means 2 to 3% probably isn't going to go back into the recharge. So I'm not sure if you're going to be talking about taking too much water, you're going to probably do something where you're taking more than that 2%, and that's somewhat unusual, according to what the statistics show.
Go ahead, Susan.
That's why I say that it flows through. Right. It's actually not very much of it probably is consumed or actually completely taken out of the system forever.
I was just reading sorry.
Nope, go for it.
I was just reading a quote from a Papago elder who was talking about how every morning he would tell his son to take a drink, but take as little as you can. And basically, he was saying we're in a very arid place. In order for us to survive, we have to have water, but so does everyone else. So, think about how much you're consuming. Use as much as you need to stay alive, but don't overuse it. And so, I think part of what we have to look at is really our relationship to water, where we're at, in this environment, and stop thinking about water in very general terms. I'm a really strong advocate of trying to look beyond these generic terms of the forest, the water, and things like that, and say, what is the forest in this place that I'm in? What are the plants? What is the resource base? What can it tolerate? Of the people that are here. So, be cognizant of where I'm at.
Go ahead, Kareen, and then I got a question for Carson, and then Susan, you can come back.
Right, kind of related to what Bentley said. Again, in this environment, there's no reason for us to have lawns, right? This is again a disconnection from place, where lawns were meant for a place where you have 30 inches of rain a year, right? Not here where we have 16 inches, or in Helena where we have 11 inches or even less. And so I think that's where people haven't reconnected to where they actually live and understood their watershed and their environment. And so we create these artificial places. And then, in my opinion, it's hard to justify use beyond what we need, because then we're watering our lawns and we're fertilizing our lawns, and then we're mowing our lawns to water them again. And it's just this vicious circle, and it's silly.
Carson, where does most urban water go?
Onto lawns.
Okay.
If you want the short answer.
Yeah, no, that's all I wanted.
I'm going to try and say that. Lawns.
All right.
Half of the city's consumption of water per year goes on the outdoor lawns and gardens.
If so much is being spent on agriculture and lawns, you have to wonder if there's another approach we could be taking that might help us retain some of that water, lessen the strain on our supply. For that, we turn to Kareen Erbe for the permaculturist take.
So one thing, when they talk about, water use in general, say in the United States, for example, and irrigation takes up most of the water. But that's industrial agriculture and chemical agriculture. So chemical and industrial ag use 10 times more water than, say, biological or ecological farming systems. Why is that? It's because microorganisms are no longer present in the soil. Organic matter is no longer present in the soil. So they have to use more water. Whereas if there are soil microorganisms in the soil, there's more organic matter, then you can store more water in the soil and you're not having to use as much water. So slowly working and getting off of chemical agriculture or industrial agriculture, however you want to say it, would be beneficial in terms of water use. There's been a lot of studies done with compost teas, or oftentimes people refer to them as soil probiotics, or putting soil microorganisms back onto land to regenerate that land. And that's what gives the soil its structure, and that's what holds more water.
There's still another complication in our relationship with water in our communities. And even when we have access to clean water and the infrastructure to provide it and treat the wastewater safely, not everyone has equal access to those resources. How we build and develop is part of a complex network of our interactions with water, as Matt Kelley illustrated.
As the health department, we have people living on the outskirts of our community without plumbing, without wastewater treatment systems. And they're doing that because they came here for work and there's no place affordable for them to live. And they're living in unhealthy situations, and we're working really hard to change that. We need developers, we need the housing in order to be able to have those people have a place that's safe and healthy. At the same time, I think we have to be able to listen to our valley, and we need as a community to be able to say no sometimes. And when I say listen to our valley, we have a valley with large swaths of high groundwater. We get septic permits on a regular basis that are proposing building in flood zones, within the flood zone, and in a high groundwater area. And even then, it can be difficult for the Board of Health to say no. And I think as a community, we need to build a culture where we're willing to say yes sometimes, but we're willing to say no and draw a line when things don't make sense, and listen to the ecology, listen to the land.
Ultimately, we have to return to the fundamental question. If we put aside the technical concerns, the legal distinctions, and the nuances of policy, we find ourselves faced with the task of answering for ourselves, is it a human right?
I would say yes, it is a human right. I grew up understanding that, we have a right and a responsibility to water, to take care of it, to develop a strong relationship with it, and to try to understand the nature of it. I was taught where all the springs are on my reservation, where to expect to find water, and the ways of trying to ensure that it continues to flow by taking action, by taking some kind of repetitive action, ceremonial or otherwise, to ensure that it will continue. So yeah, I think that right is really a first right.
I spent a lot of time thinking about this over the last couple of days, and I went way back in my political philosophy thinking, and I said, well, it's not a right. If we're living in a state of nature, you go back to Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, and you think about prior to government, we have access to water. You go out, you find a stream, you take it. Assuming you have some technology, you drill a well, you've got water. And we make certain trade-offs in classical political thought that we turn over some of that right to our government, to our elected officials. We give up that natural right to go take what you need from nature, whether that's taking whatever you find growing out of the ground, or harvesting food, shooting an animal, whatever. But it's the government's obligation to provide us with a system of water rights and with a system of access to water. And that's the great social compact, the contract that we make as part of living in a civilized society, I think. So when I say it's not a right, I want to be careful to say that I think that anybody should ever go without clean, healthy drinking water. But I think that when we talk about rights and we talk about the unlimited accessibility that we have to our rights, then I get really, really uncomfortable qualifying water as a right.
I think that we have a right to use water. Now, does that mean it's a human right? I guess that would, from what I've learned about this, because I had to kind of figure out what that question meant, and I believe what it means in a lot of discussions is that should government provide water at no charge? Should the city of Bozeman be charging for water? Because people have a right to it, so there shouldn't be a charge to it. I believe that our society is a very successful society that has developed, I think, a successful set of rules and guidelines and parameters, and our Constitution lays it out pretty clearly. And DNRC does an outstanding job in dealing with it, as well as the Bureau of Mines and Geology. We have probably one of the most studied valleys in Montana, and they've done great work. But whether or not it's government's job, first of all, if my answer were yes, that it's a human right, then that turns our present Constitution on its head, as well as our current statutes. And I'm satisfied with the way that they're put together today. My answer is no.
So I'll go yes. And yes, because it's only because the state of Montana, through the U.S. Constitution and the federal system, claims that it owns the water. The reality is that you don't own water until you use it by drinking it or whatever else you do with it. Water comes from all different places and it goes in all different places, often whether we like it or not. And government can have a role in allocating it, but it seems to me the allocation has to be for the good of everybody. And I think this is a worldwide issue, the good of everybody in the world. We need to start thinking about water that way. And if we start thinking about water that way, then it becomes, to me, a human right.
Water is the right to life, and it's the right to life for all life, human and non-human. We can't live without the ecosystem services of non-human life for air, solar energy, and recycling and nutrients and minerals. I personally cannot live without being in the middle of that, and that's why I farm.
I mean, we are 60% water. We will die if we don't drink water within 3 days' time. I think on the one level I can understand and appreciate what you're saying, Brian and Steve, but on this philosophical level, all human cultures have had a reverence for water. It is what brings us life. In 2010, the UN passed a resolution that the water was a human right. The US didn't sign it, of course, and it's not within our US Constitution, but I think that the American public views the right to clean water as a human right.
Well, yes. I mean, from the perspective that I come from, yes, but my perspective is different than others' perspectives. Does everybody have the right to all the water they want, whenever they want, for whatever they want? No. Should people have the right to enough water to raise a healthy family and stay healthy, and not just the water that comes out of our tap, but the water that's in the corn, the fresh corn that I buy on the corner? Yes, I think that is a human right. And I really think this question, the reason this question is debatable, is because different people bring different perspectives and different baggage to what that means. But if you're asking me if it's a right for people to have the water they need to live their lives, absolutely yes.
I've struggled with this one since the beginning, and I'm deeply conflicted over this and have deep questions over it. Stewardship would be more where I would focus on it, stewardship and figuring out how to live with it. I really ball up with the idea of having the right to water or the right to air or the right to own something. That's the place where I ball up with that, is that with the ideological structure of a right to something means you own it or you possess it. And I don't view myself as owning or possessing the land in which my home is on. I don't view myself as owning the water that comes through my house or comes through my body. I view that as a stewardship of the resource, a stewardship and a relationship in depth with that resource. And that's where I would start to ask the next level questions of how do we move to being better stewards of the resource? How do we move to be in a better relationship with it? Not how do we exercise our rights, because we've got a couple hundred years of history of exercising our rights that we've appropriated. And it's amazing that it's always in the language. We've appropriated the right of water. We've taken it from somewhere, we've appropriated that right. And that's always in a taking. We've never come and said, no, we're going to be in a relationship, we're going to figure out how to have an irrigation district that stewards the water, or stewards the water so that that resource is there for the next generation, or the following generation, or the following generation after that. So in the right is, for me, is embedded this idea of ownership where somebody can own that, whereas I just feel like we're passing through, and we should be better stewards.
One of my elders, Linwood Talbot, was involved in our projects at Mountain Time Arts, and he did an interview and walked us through a wetlands area when I was doing my piece, and he spoke about water as a blessing. And so he talked about, when you find water, touch it and rub it on your head, bless yourself with it. And so I think that stewardship grows out of relationships like that. If we have actions that we can take and that we try to take, that maybe we develop our own in the presence of that water. I've been taught when you take something, make a gesture of some kind, whatever it might be. And that reminds me not to take too much and to really be thankful for what's there that I'm taking and honor it.
As the panelists concluded their thoughts and the audience started to filter out, we sent our writer Dylan back out to capture some of their parting thoughts.
So what's on your mind at the conclusion of the discussion tonight?
One of the questions that we've talked about, and I'm a big fan for conserving resources, whether it's water, materials, energy, et cetera, is if the city of Bozeman and the greater area conserves water, say, 30 to 50% of the water, they conserve that water for the sole purpose of supporting more growth. So there's no discussion about how that water may go back to the resource, go back in for in-stream flows, support fish, and the health of rivers. And so essentially, we're all advocating and supporting conservation of water to support more growth, more people, more traffic, et cetera, into the county.
So what are you taking away from the discussion tonight?
A lot of things, a lot of good topics were touched, but I think it could have gone more in depth on every topic. I think the whole length of the discussion could have been twice as long, obviously. I had a concern on gray water, and specifically the boundary between Gallatin and Madison counties, the town, quote-unquote, of Big Sky, and them releasing gray water into the Gallatin River, and how detrimental that is to our valley, because it goes through it. And obviously the Yellowstone Club has 50,000 square foot homes, and they are taking our water, but then releasing their gray water into our river. But it's all in Madison County. So I was kind of had a curiosity on county borders. That's
Awesome.
about it.
Well, thank you.
The question that came to my mind is trying to make an analogy between water rights and human rights, and right to breathe clean air or watch the sun, and on the heels of a phenomena such as the solar eclipse, seeing the effect that had when you take away even a little bit of the sun, and it gets cold and you realize that we would die pretty quick if you take away kind of that natural resource. And I think water's pretty similar.
You can have the theoretical discussion, which is always important, and I think that's the genesis for where you get practical action. But that's the piece, too, that also has to be discussed because it's so heavily interrelated. And that's why I was like, oh, they needed a lawyer on the panel, because I'm biased. Of course you need a lawyer on every panel, right? But from that standpoint is that you have to, once you have community will or impetus or whatever, you have to have legislative will and impetus, which are often two very different things if you want to go more broad levels.
With that, we draw this episode to a close and encourage you to comment on our page and start a dialogue in your community. Remember, share airtime and don't ruin dinner. This episode was produced by Tyson Lunn, Dylan Jesse, and me, Tate Chamberlin. Music was by Nintendo. A special thanks to our panel, EJ Engler, Kareen Erbe, Carson Taylor, Susan Duncan, Steve White, Matt Kelley, Bentley Spang, and Brian Popiel. This episode was commissioned by Mountain Time Arts. The sponsors include Humanities Montana, the City of Bozeman, the Montana Governor's Office of Economic Development, Montucky Cold Snacks, the Nova Cafe, 10 Directions, Headframe Spirits, Zocalo Coffee House, Whistlepig Korean, Sola Cafe and Market, Shank Construction, the Pride Foundation, Loken Productions, and Blunderbuss. A huge thank you to our board of directors, Jacob Desch, Yarrow Craner, Chris Gentry, Chad Urashak, Kia Abbey, Jessica Byerly, Greg Smith, Debbie Shank, Justin Wayne, and me, Tate Chamberlin. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? Contact us at iaminterchange.org. That's iaminterchange.org.